Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's a Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 16th of October 2023. I hope you're all well and you have had a restful weekend. Things have not rested in Ukraine, being at war, but in terms of geopolitics, it's been a busy weekend, and that stretches to Poland, where we've seen elections. More of that soon. This is great. I mean, I know half of my American viewers will hate Biden, half of you will like him, or at least he's someone who better represents your politics. This is just awesome. I think objectively awesome if you like. If you are pro-Ukrainian, this is what you want to hear. So, Biden on the question whether the US is able to help both Israel and Ukraine at the same time. I just think this is pretty drop micy. So we'll see what he has to say.
For the wars in Israel and Ukraine, more than the United States can take on at the same time.
We're the United States of America, for God's sake. The most powerful nation in the history, not in the world, in the history of the world. The history of the world. We can take care of both of these and still maintain our overall international defense. We have the capacity to do this, and we have an obligation to. And if we don't, who does?
I just love that. It's brilliant. It's said like it is. We're the most powerful nation in the history of the world. We can do this and look after ourselves. Thank you very much. And if we don't, who else is going to be in a position to be able to do that? Because if we don't, China's going to pick up the slack. So, yes, we can. And yes, we will, because we have an obligation. So I thought that's really clear and really good from Biden. I don't care what you believe about Biden. That is a kind of rhetoric that is strong, but also considered and useful. Okay, the combined aid package for Ukraine and Israel will be much larger than $2 billion, says Jake Sullivan. As the White House National Security Advisor said, US President Joe Biden will this week convince Congress of the need to approve the package. There's a bit of a political mess in the US at the moment with regard to who will be the speaker for the majority speaker for the House of Representatives, be a Republican, represent the Republican caucus there. And there are options. Most of them are not looking good for Ukraine. Jim Jordan, you definitely, if you're pro-Ukraine, you definitely don't want him the head of the Freedom Caucus. So I won't go off on one about what kind of politician he is and who he represents, but he's not my kind of politician. And if you are into supporting Ukraine, he's not your politician. At least on that, you might like him for other things, but if Ukraine is important to you, and it is more important to you than other things, then Jim Jordan's probably not your guy. Okay. The White House confirmed the idea of combining aid packages, as mentioned. This is a way, as I said last week, a way of getting the Ukraine aid through because there's such strong feeling for Israel. Although you have never seen so many pro-Palestine rallies, you've got to be careful. Like I keep saying, pro-Palestine doesn't mean you're pro-Hamas. So will be a lot of people who are not a fan of what Hamas did, which is horrifically morally reprehensible. But the overall goal of having some kind of statehood and nationhood for Palestine is something they agree with. So there's a lot of people coming out in support of the Palestine and thinking what the Israelis are doing in response to the horrific Hamas killings and kidnappings and whatnot, that what the Israelis are doing in indiscriminately bombing civilian places under the pretense, if you like, as according to some people, of hitting military establishments or military personnel is equally reprehensible, right? So the problem is people are jumping on one side or the other, going to the extremes, and the reality is that it's a hot mess and we need to unpick that, and it's really, really difficult and possibly intractable without solution. So, but there's a lot of political support for Israel within American politics, and so if there's a reticence to support Ukraine, and if we can smuggle the Ukraine aid in on Israel aid, then perhaps we've got a better chance of getting the Ukraine aid through. But that appears to be the tack that the government is taking. This is going on to military assistance. So that may have sounded geopolitical, but that's in the context of giving military aid, both as far as what Joe Biden was saying and the package assistance packages that may or may not come soon. The help comes in many forms. The Netherlands has just handed over 4 mobile hospitals to Ukraine. They're described as ballistic armored stabilization and diagnostic modules, together with a dental office. No English translation for this video, but it shows a lot of detail. We'll just expand this to give you a sense of, mute it, give you a sense of what it is they are being given, and there's a lot of great medical kit and facilities here that will be super useful. Germany's been big on giving medical facilities similar to this. This is the Dutch doing their bit, and they're just incredibly important for allowing those troops to survive, and maybe even fight another day, but at least to survive with the best chance of reintegrating into society in some way. So important, obviously, so important. Right, Air Force. Western countries leased Ukraine air defense systems. Quote, the fact that Ukraine can have these systems for use during the heating season is a significant and positive sign, says Yuri Knapp, the Air Force's spokesperson. Now, Ukraine, basically what's happening, well, Ukraine is leasing air defense systems to strengthen its defense. So this is probably quite a good way of doing things, which is to say, right, these are our air defense systems. They're actually part of our national air defense network, but we can't foresee ourselves needing them for the next year. So if you want to use this Patriot or this NASAMS or whatever it is, there must be some countries that are saying, you can have this. You can basically rent off us. You can lease this off us long term, and that will increase your air defense capabilities. And I think that's probably a good way of doing it. And then at the end of the war, yeah, we'll have that back if it's not been blown up. Andrew Perpetua here has a big old rant about ammunition, and I'm going to dip into his rant here because I get what he's saying. So I fail to understand why people believe Russia adding more ammo. So the idea that that they are getting ammo from North Korea, for example, and then this may mean that Russia is suddenly in a much more commanding position. Andrew Perpetua is a little more guarded here. He says, I fail to understand why people, he's not guarded in the way he presents this, why people believe Russia adding more ammo will change anything for them. They already had a huge ammunition advantage. They already had more guns. More ammo doesn't fix the fact that the SPG, self-propelled guns, have to move to the front to fire and get mustacided by FPVs. Okay, what does he mean by this? So he's saying that having ammunition or not doesn't change the fact that these self-propelled guns are firing far too close to the front line because their barrels are worn. Right? In other words, they've got more of an issue with the maintenance of their artillery than they do with the ammunition that the artillery need to fire. Right? And more ammunition doesn't solve the gun problem. So not only are they running shorter on actual howitzers and self-propelled guns, but because the barrels are worn, they're having to move it becomes a vicious cycle. Barrels get worn, you move them closer, more of them get blown up. You have to get older ones from storage that don't have good barrels. You have to move them closer, they get blown up. And so there's this continual degradation of the Russian artillery provision here, and it's not solved by ammunition. More ammunition doesn't change the FPV drone range, which is rapidly increasing, including 13.5 kilometer hits the other day. We've supposedly seen a 17 kilometer hit as well. More ammo doesn't change the fact that Ukraine's 155 ammo generally, if mostly, outranges Russia. More ammo doesn't stop D-pickums, so the cluster munitions, from landing on your firing position. So yeah, they're getting more ammo, but their ammo and their guns aren't precise. They don't have the range. They aren't PGM, precision guided munition ammo, like Excalibur. Ukrainians have a greater range, greater precision, and greater capability in terms of things like cluster munitions that the Russians generally aren't using as much. And he says it just makes no sense, none at all. There's no logic behind it. Ammo is not a concern for Russia. It's barrel quality, range, ability to conduct counter battery fire, drones, and the general fact that they are slowly moving from SPGs to towed guns, moving back to towed guns because their SPGs are getting so degraded. Ukraine, on the other hand, They do need ammo. Ammo is a huge deal for Ukraine. Russia, not so much. It isn't that often that people go to a thread, refuse to think through what is being said, reject all the nuance, and embarrass themselves this hardcore. But here we have it. Maybe this explains why the experts are also getting it so effing wrong. So he's talking about how people are doom posting about, say, the North Korean ammo supplies, but it's just not the key issue for Russia. And I tell you what, he's right. Ukraine definitely do need that ammo. IMF has launched a fund to reinforce Ukraine's reform efforts amid the war. Ukraine Capacity Development Fund has already received $14 million from donors, with a target of raising $65 million. That would super help Ukraine, especially with a budget deficit, although they've got a sort of 4.6 projected increase in their GDP. When you've had a 27% decrease or 29% decrease or whatever it was the year before, like a 4 to 5% increase is still leaving you with a big black hole, and they obviously need money to operate as a nation. The authorities of the Russian Federation continue to carry out hidden mobilization, represented in the main director of intelligence and Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Andriy Yusov, has said, quote, mobilization measures continue, and we are talking about tens of thousands of people per month. No matter how the dictatorship treats the population, no matter how it ignores democratic public opinion, they are afraid. They are afraid of a riot. However, the machine is being prepared for new ways of mobilization. So absolutely, and I fully assume this is happening. This crypto mobilization is taking place ahead of a full national mobilization we're likely to see after March 17th, after the presidential elections. But they don't want to have this mass mobilization because it's political suicide, but they need those people. And so they are doing it in other ways, and that is providing, according to this source, some 10,000 or tens of thousands of new recruits per month. And that is obviously a worry for the Ukrainians. So let's now move on to geopolitical stuff. And we're going to start with today, the first train in 18 years. I don't know, I suppose it's geopolitical. It's connecting Poland to Ukraine. First train in 18 years left from Lviv to Warsaw. It connects 10 Ukrainian cities and 2 Polish cities. I would like to look into whether there's anything here to do with the gauge of the railway. Now, the Ukrainians have historically, if I remember correctly, had a gauge that is different from European gauges, is more aligned to the Soviet gauge and railway system. And that has meant that, you know, when they get things delivered from Poland, it has to be unloaded and then loaded from one rail to another rail. I wonder if Ukrainians are, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, that they have been trying to move towards a more uniform, kind of universal gauge in terms of Europe. This would undoubtedly be part of that if that's the case. But someone else with more knowledge about that may want to chip in. Here we have this is a Hungarian, I think, is it the foreign minister? Yeah, who I reported on this weekend. Went to Russia, to Moscow, to meet with the Kremlin because Hungary, right? Because Hungary and Russia. But under the guise, I guess, of energy, Russia is still involved in Hungarian energy. Quote, in the EU, it is impossible to discuss strategic issues of the European future due to their politicization. If your opinion does not correspond with the opinion of the liberal majority, he will be perceived as a Kremlin propagandist, which is exactly the reaction I just had to him. So I am the sort of person he would be accusing of being, you know, a liberal majority attacking him. Just, you know, and it's unfair. It's just overt politicization of the situation. Well, maybe. I mean, I don't deny that I'm a liberal, but it doesn't stop you, as a member of the Hungarian parliament, being pro-Russian. Okay, big news concerns Poland. Big news from Poland. If exit polls are correct, an opposition coalition headed by Donald Tusk's or the opposition coalition civic platform headed by Donald Tusk is likely to form the next government. Tusk recently said that there is no alternative to a pro-Ukrainian policy after a spat between Poland and Ukraine over grain exports. Now, here we have a 36.6%, this is exit polls, 36.6% exit poll for in favour of PIS. This is a Justice and Law Party. So this is the Polish ruling party. It's been ruling for 8 years, but they are really quite right-wing in a way that they have affected loads of cultural issues like access to abortion. They've done some democratic backsliding, trying to mess with the judiciary, all sorts of stuff that's very similar to the kind of Hungarian approach, but they're pro-Ukrainian. But they've been increasingly anti-EU. And then you've got Donald Tusk's party, who is pro-EU. I mean, he is a former EU politician. But a number of the opposition parties who are not... So there's no outright over 50% majority, which means there has to be a coalition. But since no one, I don't think, would go into, apart from maybe this is, I think, a very right-wing party, if I'm correct, doesn't get them to 50%, and no one else will go into coalition with them. But if you have 20, that gives you 22% onto this, then they get over 50%. So it's almost certain. Now these exit polls are actually have changed since then, but Tusk is still looking at probably being in charge of a coalition and ruling Poland. The highest recorded voter turnout in Poland, so it's really energized the electorate because there's so much on the line. So there's a lot of sort of women, a lot of liberals who would be, there's been a lot of anti-LGBT sentiment from the Justice and Law Party, so anyone in any of these demographics are more likely to be voting for opposition. So, quote, Poland's opposition parties look like they've won a solid victory in the country's general election, and if the result holds, it signals a radical change both in Poland and the EU, where current Law and Justice Party government has warred for 8 years with Brussels over accusations it's backsliding on the bloc's democratic values and rules. I would agree with that. And indeed, Poland election exit polls point to Law and Justice defeat, even though they're the biggest party still. Updated polls suggest PIS on 36.6% and Tusk's alliance on 31%, but the latter is likely to be able to form a coalition. So Poland's ruling populists appear to be headed for an electoral defeat in what would be one of the most consequential European political turnarounds in recent years. If exit polls showing a victory for an opposition coalition led by Donald Tusk proved to be correct, the exit polls suggested that the ruling PIS party received the most votes, but the Tusk Civic Coalition, together with two other opposition parties, should have a route to a parliamentary majority. Tusk, who was Polish Prime Minister between 2007 and 2014 and then became European Council President for 5 years, declared victory almost immediately after the polls closed on Sunday. There was no route for PIS, claiming there's no route for PIS to claim a third term in office. Quote, "It's the end of the evil times. It's the end of the PIS rule. We made it," he said, speaking at a party event inside Warsaw's Ethnography Museum to the sound of cheers from supporters. Quote, "We won democracy, we won freedom, we won our free beloved Poland. This day will be remembered in history as a bright day, the rebirth of Poland." This is really significant. I mean, this is why it energized a lot of people there, but it was kind of painted as good versus evil, or as kind of like democracy versus autocracy, or that kind of thing. And how accurate that is, I don't know, but I would certainly, I'm not a fan of the Justice and Law Party and think that they have rolled back human rights, civil rights, and democratic values in the country. So I would welcome this as being a good thing, and certainly, well, PIS have been supportive of Ukraine massively as well. But I think if you're going to diverge from the EU and have issues internally in that respect, that's more likely to get in the way of continued support for Ukraine. So I think Ukraine would probably be all right with either party ruling, but in terms of looking to the future, looking for EU integration from a Ukrainian point of view, and looking at the most support from Poland, this result would make you happier from a Ukrainian point of view. That's my reading of that. Correct me if you think I'm wrong. Yeah. Lots more to say on that. It's a really interesting election there. Latvia has today completely closed the only road crossing into Russia. The checkpoint at Vientuli is shut. However, this should make it more difficult for any Ukrainians trying to leave Russia, for instance, after forced evacuation. So, yeah, there is a challenge there. But you can see that Russia is more and more becoming this pariah state, isolated from the rest of the world. Now, this is a bit of a worry, talking about EU integration. So Georgia is run by a party called Georgian Dream, who nominally are pro-EU. And at least that's part of what got them into power. But they aren't really. They're actually pro-Russia as a ruling party. And they've been probably, it's a bit of speculation from me here, with Russian influence, rolling back their idea of getting closer to the EU. And that is a shame for all of those who are sort of pro-European and pro, or like not up for Russia having its fingers in a lot of geographically local pies. There was this issue when the president, Salome Zurabachvili, or something. Now, she went to the EU and met with a bunch of entities in the EU, and Georgian Dream didn't like that. And now it looks like they're going to begin impeaching their own president because that was. I mean, this has almost certainly got Russian fingerprints over it. Why you'd impeach someone for going to do politics in Europe, in the biggest trading bloc in the world, like why you would try and stop someone doing that, other than we don't want to join the EU and the EU is in some ways some kind of threat, and you'd only think that if you were Russia. Like this to me is actually a bit of a worry, but it shows you the fault lines within Georgia, where you have a lot of the Georgian population not being a fan of what Georgian Dream are doing in running the country. And going forward, I don't know when their elections would be, and I hope they don't have such a grip over the electoral processes that they don't get free and fair elections. But it will be really interesting to see where Georgia goes, because this is a move towards Russia and the sphere of influence of Russia, unfortunately. One to keep an eye on. US representative for Ukraine's economic recovery has arrived in Kyiv. I reported previously that Penny Pritzker was appointed as US special representative for economic recovery in Ukraine. This is really important to get Ukraine back on its feet. There needs to be a sustainable growth or sustainable economy in Kyiv, but also there needs to be things put in place for real tangible goals for Ukraine to achieve on an annual basis going forward, and they need the inward investment from outside so that they can rebuild and become, realize their own potential. So the US, and I'm sure this has a lot to do with transparency as well, have this a team headed by Penny Pritzker involved in sorting that. So she arrived in Kyiv on October the 16th. That's today. US Ambassador to Ukraine Bridget Brink reported. This is Pritzker's first visit to Ukraine since the appointment in September. Good news, as the person says, a further strengthening the ties with Ukraine, as it should be, with the threat that Putin poses to global stability. All this kind of stuff is so important. Anyway, hopefully that is informative and useful for you. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all of your support. Thank you. Stay tuned, and I'll get out a video later. And as I said, I'm going to try and do an Israel-Palestine series. That'll be just me sitting in the middle going, "Oh, it's so confusing." Make of that what you will when it happens. Take care. Speak soon.